Can we have a round of applause for Saurabh, ladies and gentlemen?
Thank you.
Welcome,
Thank you.
Saurabh.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks to be here. And first of all, thanks, Analytics India magazine. It's always a pleasure to be here on the stage working with Analytics India on different events. Last year also, I was part of MLDS and Data Engineering Summit as well. So today, first of all, I would like to ask how many of you are part of the governance space or compliance space, have been working in this space? Because, okay, I see some few hands already there. So that's really good because in the last few sessions, we have seen people speaking about agents, about LLMs, about prompts, right? So what I am trying to bring in is a perspective of the different types of regulations that is across in an organization, being working as a governance officer, what are the key inputs that we need to think about whenever we work with the different data scientist teams, data BIU teams, and all. So this is one aspect we always neglect or we get sidelined. People they don't consider that we more focus on the fine tuning of the models. We more focus on the other things, right? So let me just ask you. So this is something about me. I'll just bring it on. But coming up with an entire data experience across the years, my entire journey has also transformed, right? Being like a database developer, then going into the compliance and the governance space and all. So I keep on continuously doing a lot of these things, and today I'm going to share some of these insights on it. So first of all, let me just ask you, how many of you are aware about AI governance? Have you heard this term, AI governance? Okay, I see a few hands around. That's really nice. That's good. So I think this becomes a very important topic of discussion, and for you, all of you, even to be aware of what are the different regulations, because around when you'll be working with the organizations, you'll be working with different teams, you need to understand, right? So as part of a governance officer, it becomes very much important to have those right policies in place, have the right practices in place, have the right aligning these practices with the different types of frameworks so that you need to, while you are trying to work on the model governance, model prioritization, and efficiency, there are other aspects also that you think about, where you need to have these policies in place, identifying the right AI stakeholders, AI actors as part of it. Now, these are some of the significant risks. So Gartner came out with some of the key priority risk identifications, where organizations they mentioned like what are the key concerns that they are more about. So one of the key you can see is the 42% is more on the data privacy side, while a lot of the organizations are working on, the other aspects where you can see bias and fairness people are speaking about, where you can see a lot of security aspects being spoken about, hallucinations being focused, but majority of people have, highlighted about data privacy being very, prominent aspect about it, and that's the reason where you can see a lot of significant risks which are associated with AI. So one of the key aspects is unauthorized mass surveillance of the models that you're creating. You have something which is also about the unexpected and unintentional breaches on with respect to your personal data that is going around. So the models feeds in a lot of the personal data, the different types of personal identifier information of the customers, right? So that looks. Then there's a lot of personal data that has been taken and it gets manipulated. You might have heard about deepfakes and all, right? So where customers' informations have been being identified, they have been used in between, they have been injected in between, and then later they have been used for manipulating and then reaching out in a different way. Generation of deepfakes, as I was mentioning, then violation of the different data protection principles. So across your data privacy regulations, if you see, there are certain key components that are very prominent across the different regulations like GDPR and all. So one is with respect to purpose limitations. So when you see you go for, let's say, account opening, the banks start asking you a lot of information, but is there an actual need for asking all those information? So purpose limitation, data minimization, storage of those relevant data has to be there. So a lot of these regulations these days, you'll see, will start speaking about these aspects. Then I heard a few of the sessions where people were speaking about societal bias, where discrimination and the models that we are doing, like for example, you have a person who is a black and a white, and the model starts behaving in a very different way. So that kind of discrimination and societal bias should not be there, And there is also another aspect of intellectual property and copyright infringement, right? So this you can see primarily in the arts space, where you now see a lot of, you just upload a model with a lot of songs and all, and it starts creating a new song for you. That is something that's completely disrupting the entire industry. And the same side of things, as you can start feeding the model with a lot of images and it can start getting a new content, right? So intellectual property and copyright infringement is also one of the key aspects that you will start looking into. So this was one of the things where in March 2023, around 30,000 individuals involving a lot of the technologists and leading corporation industries, they came in together and they wanted some of the new regulations to start coming up as part of the AI Act. Now, one of the key components which a lot of organizations are using is the Gartner's AI Prism framework. So if you see this layer, it has multiple layers in it. So while your AI systems is including all your models or applications on your agents, which is part of it, on the top of it, the key components which the risk, security, and the trust aspects on which AI Prism focuses on is one is explainability and transparency. Anyways, responsible AI also has this component. Model management and model operations. So right from the point where you start identifying, you're creating your model, you start developing your model through your entire life cycle, from model deployment, model testing, model validation, all part of it. It's aligns to those principles of DevOps and DataOps. That is part of it. Then you also have content anomaly detection, you have data protection with respect to the privacy regulations I was speaking. Application security has a component of AI security and the data security components. So these are the key technological components which Gartner came out as part of the Prism model. Again, this is a framework which some of the organizations are using as well. Then, and on the bottom, you can see there is privacy, fairness, bias, and control. These are the key objectives that we try to do as for any models. On the other side of things, you have how you start defining the policies, the workflow management, and start automating the entire thing where you try building in and bringing in a lot of the AI actors, the chief data officer part of it, AI officer part of it, the data scientist, ML engineers, data engineers part of it, right? So all of these will start aligning those roles and responsibilities and aligning them to these entire principles. Now, if you can see, we try to identify some of these blind spots. We have something called a shadow AI. Have anyone heard about shadow AI? What is shadow AI? So a lot of times, what happens, the AI models, they keep on working in the behind, and you don't understand what is the actual model working on, and what is the model performing on. So shadow AI is also one of a key aspect where in the behind, there's a lot of models that we work, but what are they doing, how they are working is something not very clear. So you can see on the top, there are a lot of regulations because while the AI models, you can see a lot of these AI models being in there, what kind of security controls are there? What is the risk rating that you look? And some of the regulations that you can see, the European Union came up with the AI Act. I will be speaking in the next slides. We have the Canada came out with the AI, IDA, Artificial Intelligence and Data Act. We also have the United States coming up with 14110. You have the, within that specific regulations, state-specific regulations like New York came up with their United States New York regulations. Illinois had their own regulations. Brazil came up with their AI law somewhere in 2023. China has been quite pioneer in some of these AI regulations as well. So they have their interim measures on Gen AI, which was quite popular. Algorithmic recommendations and provisions, which again China came up with. Singapore has a model AI framework. So because a lot of you I know will be working across with clients which is across the different geographies, right? So it becomes very much important for all of you to also being aware that when you are working with a specific client in a specific geography, try to be aware of what kind of regulations that they might be falling into, and you need to comply with those regulations. So it's not only a job of building the models or creating, testing, validating of these models. You need to be aware of these regulations coming across. So I will speak across some of these regulations in today so that you get a bit of an idea and awareness about it, so that when you're working with your clients, you can speak, you can understand what they are speaking about. They are not completely unaware of them. Now, if you see, to establish the entire AI governance module, it's a more of a 5-step approach. So first is the component of discovering the AI models that you're working, right? So in this phase, you are trying to analyze what is the systems, what is the use case, what is the business. So in the previous session, you already have heard, so business objectives, business outcomes is the core aspect, right? So what is the use case? What are the different use cases? Based on those use cases, what are the models that I'm going to build? Whether I'm going to use a RAG, whether I'm going to use a diffusion model, whether I'm going to use some of the other model like autoregressive model or generative or deterministic kind of AI models. So that's the AI model discovering aspect and where it is residing, whether it is going to be there across your public clouds, on your private clouds, or any of your SaaS applications. Then the second aspect is how you can start assessing the AI model's risk. Right, so in this, there is an entire risk management framework. I might not be able to cover it today, but in the deck it is already there. So, you can reach out to me later. I can share that with you. And on my LinkedIn also, I'm going to post it. But there is an entire risk assessment framework, right from identifying the risk, checking the risk, and then validating the risk. Well, the third aspect is the data mapping the data and the AI flows, right? So AI governance obviously is a kind of a logical extension to your data governance, right? So some of you might already be working on data lineages, identifying the data process flows, data flows and all. So that is also one of the key components, right? Because all of your AI models, if you take, inherently will use data, right? So even when you start defining and creating your AI governance, one of the key aspects is to establish a proper data governance principles. So in data governance, what we normally try to do is, we try to identify where is my data getting generated from, how is the data getting transformed, how is the data getting moving, using a different pipelines, what kind of transformations it is going through. So the entire data life cycle. So even that gets extended to your AI side. Then in implementing the data AI controls, what kind of necessary controls that you're going to put in. So in that aspect, you will have to work with your security teams, the risk management teams, what kind of controls that you can start putting in, you will put in that. The step 5 is more with respect to complying. So you have the program management piece, the compliance team, where you understand what are the regulations which are there, and you need to start complying with them. Now I'm going to just skip some of the slides because this I just spoke across, how you can start identifying across which all environments it needs to reside on. Now, one of the important aspect is the measuring the value, right? So you have something called as model cards, where you start collecting, you start defining the purpose of the model, what kind of training data that you are doing. So a lot of these things, like some of you might be aware about the concept of data products. Have you ever heard about data products? Data as a product, where you now start thinking that data is like a product. It has a complete data product life cycle. Just like as a product manager, what is the role of a product manager? You right from the point where the conception of the product happens, right from development and even at the end life cycle, right? So same goes for the data also, So the same aspect goes for your model cards, right? So a lot of times we miss on the documentation part of it. What is the data that is getting used? What is the purpose of the model? Then what's the model architecture? What is it being developed for? What is the use cases that it is going to support? So a lot of these things will start coming in. So you start creating a lot of these documentation so that at any point in time, there is a very high level of transparency that is residing. Then, as I was mentioning, so you start cataloging a lot of these, right? So just like you have data catalogs, where at any point in time, you get a complete view about all the aspects around the data. Same goes with your AI aspects also. You start cataloging a lot of these things, and then start identifying these aspects around it. Then one of the important aspects is to review and validate what is the kind of input that is coming in. Now, some of the trends that are there in the AI model discovery is you don't want to do all of this manually, right? So one thing is automated discovery, right? So data classification, when whatever the data that is coming in, can I start doing classifying data into personal data, secure data, right? So one of the important aspects is cataloging a lot of these things, right? So there are a lot of tools out there, a lot of solutions out there that are right now doing it. For structured data, it's very much easy. There's a lot of things that is happening in the unstructured space because the model accuracy is still not there, right? So that is one aspect that is coming in. Second is the standardization of those things. So can I define those specific classes across which I can be standardizing them, I can be classifying them? That's the aspect. And then how they would be interoperable across them. And then cross-domain between the different business users. Can I start collaborating between different teams and start getting their inputs, start applying those inputs into your final models? Now, while you're framing the AI risk, there are different aspects that you want to look into. One is the ethics and performance aspects, where you define the bias, the discrimination aspects of it. From a societal aspects, what kind of impact that is going to create within your people in your organization, as the society as a whole, your customers and users. Then from the security perspective, what kind of security risk that you might have to look into. Like, for example, you have prompt injections that they can basically change the behavior of your model, the model behavior, the bias, and everything. So we'll just cover that as well. Then on the oversight and accountability perspective. So can I have the necessary controls in place so that I can start reducing the risk? And from an organizational perspective, is there what I'm trying to achieve? Is it meeting the business objectives that I'm looking for? Now, one such framework, if you can see, is developed by the United States National Institute of Security, which is your NIST framework. Now, how NIST defines this is primarily they have created it's more on a risk-based approach, where they have divided this into one as part of the harms that it might be creating for people, the harm that it might be creating for organizations, and the overall harm that it might be creating for overall ecosystem. Now, for that, what they have defined is govern will be there throughout your entire process when you're creating, when you're mapping your requirements, when you're measuring, or even you're managing your different requirements. So these are the key pillars, and you can see that governance layer would be covering all of them. It is there in the center. Now, along with that, social responsibility being one of the key principles. So that is also being defined as part of the ISO 26000, 2010. And what they have is responsible AI has this couple of aspects. So data governance being one of them. You have model development, one part of it, then governance and accountability, monitoring and feedback, and then model validation and testing on the other side. Now, this framework primarily has been divided into two main parts. So on part one, it is trying to frame the risk, identify the risk that is there, which are related to AI and the respective audience. Frame two is more with respect to the governing, mapping, measuring, and managing. So this framework is quite extensive. So in case you are using this framework, it has several subcategories and categories as part of it. So like, for example, on the govern space, you can see it covers the different topics on legal, regulatory, risk tolerance, risk management aspects. Under manage, it also has the different types of AI deployments, risk tolerance, risk response, covers the different categories and subpart. Similarly, it has for mapping different subsections and sections. On the measurement side perspective, also it has different frameworks. It's a very comprehensive team, so it's a very comprehensive framework when the governance team would be working on, so they need assessing across each of these areas. And as you can see, it has been divided into three main areas. The second act is the EU AI Act, which is developed by the European Union. Now, this again defines the kind of risk or categorizes the risk into four main parts. The first being the unacceptable risk, which are the prohibited risks. The second category is the high risk, which are more like those systems which has high risk but not unacceptable. The third category being the limited risk, which is more on the transparency side, and minimal risk, which is more on the code of conduct. Good examples for each of them you can see here. Like for unacceptable is more like in case there are any social scoring that has been by public authorities, or exploitation of vulnerable characteristics, right? On the high risk side of things, they have defined some of these criteria that will classify them. Similarly for limited risk and minimal risk. And when there are different articles in the European Union Act. So you can see that for each of these articles, it has been categorized into transparency and explainability. Safety and explainability has certain articles as part of it. Then on the human insight, oversight, on the privacy side, on the data security side, on the risk management side. So each of these articles mentions what are the key obligations that organizations need to take care of, right? So risk management, governance, and aspects all would be covered. These are some of the other regulations which are out there. So OECD has come up with the due diligence guidance for responsible business conduct, which is also part of their framework. Then ISO 31000 on risk management guidelines has been very specific on AI governance. United Nations NIST has been speaking about AI risk management framework, RMF. European Union came up with European Union AIA Act. Then Government of Canada has this IDA Act. Similarly, you have the Council of European Human Rights, Democracy and Rule of Law Assurance Framework for AI Systems. Again, has defined certain regulations on the AI side of governance side. IEEE has a 7021 as one of the standard on AI governance. And ISO guidelines 51, which also speaks about the AI governance aspects. Now, there has been certain cases, in the world which primarily, focuses about some of these challenges. Like, for example, OpenAI, if you guys know, was banned somewhere by the Spanish government and the French government for some time, in between, because of the data kind of residency which was not there. And it was some of the other states and countries also followed suit. And a lot of these evaluations have been done, when you want to start using any of these models, a lot of these open source models, in fact, DeepSeek and all of these which are coming up, you see that not everyone is going to go and use it, right? It also depends on what is the kind of the risk that the organization wants to take, because a lot of their data might be getting used by these models, right? So some of the organizations might be going with a complete on-premise kind of a setup. So some of these models has a limitations of working in them. Then Clearview also had an instance where, there were huge fines that were being levied on Clearview based on the kind of the data sets that they were using. Same goes with Replica AI, So these were some instances that happened in the past. And some of these laws and regulations that you are seeing, they will work along with some of the other regulations which might be there. Some might be some sectoral specific regulations. Like, for example, in Canada, you have the Canada Consumer Product Safety Act, you have the Food and Drugs Act, you have the Motor Vehicle Safety Acts also. So these regulations also, have to follow along with some of your global regulations or AI-specific regulations. Now, this is an OECD report on risk management, again of similar framework, where you can see that governance body is sitting on the top. So across your entire life cycle of your AI models, right from planning and designing, collecting, processing, building the model, verify, the governance layer sits on the top. And as you can see, this is a continuous framework, right? So this model on the right side basically shows that it is not like a one-time exercise, that you're going to just do it and close it. It's a continuous effort, right? So while you are doing it, again, you might have to revalidate, you might have to recheck what is the validation all about, and reassess and do that. Similarly, this is a similar framework that has been defined by OECD. So it starts with being responsible, defining the policies in place. Then it goes with identifying and assessing the impact assessments, what kind of impacts that it would be creating. Third is trying to prevent and mitigating some of these adverse impacts that it would be creating. Then tracking and the implementation efforts, what are the results that would be going in, how you would be start communicating how the impacts are being addressed. So it's a kind of a complete cycle, and finally, you will start working with different people for the remediation as well. This is again a risk management 31000 ISO risk management guideline. Again, one of the risk management guidelines we use for not only for the AI aspects, but any of your data aspects, data-related risk aspects also. it is quite useful. So there are certain principles and clauses across each of these frameworks that you'll see start playing a relevance. This is a kind of a comparison between the different models. Like, so on one side you have OECD, ISO 31000, NIST, right? So I was speaking about so many frameworks and so many regulations are, around. Now, which of them gets applicable to you and all? So this is a kind of a comparison across your governance, defining, assess and treat. Which of the acts are, specifically mentioning what is applicable and which of them are mentioning what is not applicable. Yeah. So if you can see the entire life cycle, risk management and life cycle, so it starts from your data collection processing, which includes your designing the models, then it goes for a verification validation. So the risk management is across the entire life cycle, and while you're trying to go through any of these frameworks, any of these models, right? So you need to start identifying and start defining. So I think I'm just gonna show a lot of these things, impact assessments. You need to do an impact assessment across identifying what are the challenges, what are the processes and methods in place. From a transparency perspective, you start identifying what are the issues, what's the purpose scope. So just like you in your data privacy side, you have impact assessment to understand what is the impact of your data privacy regulations. So on the AI side of the things also, you might try to do this impact assessment to understand the relevancy, transparency aspects. So this is a kind of a risk assessment scores you can see for some of the models on the accuracy, fairness, bias, toxicity for Anthropic, OpenAI, Meta, Google's across their model names, where organizations have done that, and then the kind of ratings that they have also provided. So yeah, I think I'm not just going to cover all of them because in the context of time, it's a quite extensive thing in itself. And I think in the previous session, some of the speakers have also spoken about some of these aspects, about the different types of attacks that is happening, the evasion attacks, poisoning attacks, privacy attacks, abuse attacks that's happening across the different industries. Again, NIST has been defining a lot of these principles across. And what are the different types of mitigation steps that goes across, right from data poisoning prevention, where data has been poisoned for the not meeting the actual needs, because a lot of these AI models will require to use data. Now, if you're exploiting the data in itself, the model might start behaving differently. DDoS, again, a security terminology now has been extended to AI side, where now you are denying the AI models from from the users from using the AI models. Data leakage prevention, again, on the security side now, while the AI models are working on it, like the chatbot and all, you are trying to get the data out from them. The chatbot starts asking the user some of these questions, personal details, which I am trying to intercept and trying to use it. And permission and entitlement controls, right? So having a role-based access controls, having with the right set of people is very much important. There are a lot of LLMs, firewalls have been coming up across where the security teams have been working on them. There are a lot of organizations that are bringing up a lot of fire in this space. Retrieval firewall, prompt firewall, response firewalls as part of it. So in the India space, if you see India guidelines on AI in biomedical research and healthcare has come up as a framework. Similarly, other organizations and other countries have their own frameworks. Vietnam has their draft national standards on AI and big data. Like that, you have different types of regulations coming up. So I'm just going to leave it over here because there's a lot of things. This topic in itself is a very big topic. Covering it in a half an hour's time is quite difficult. But I just wanted to give you some of the key ideas about some of the regulations that goes around and what are some of these. So this is some of the benchmark reports I'll share with you separately. You can have a look where there was a specific list of priority items that were being looked into by executives, and organizations defined and shared their, kind of priority areas for, when it comes to AI risk and AI governance perspective. Most of them were AI officers. Organizations responded to it based on their kind of the budgets that they want to spend on, what is the kind of new AI models they want to focus on. So it's a kind of, again, a poll or a response they have created and they have shared. So I'll just leave it up to here. I think, open it for any questions. Maybe.